There are two basic motivating forces, fear and love. When we're afraid, we pull back from life. When we're in love, we open up to all that life has to offer with passion, excitement, and acceptance.
Coming to you from our studio in Santa Barbara, California, this is the Fear Me Out podcast. We're not your typical self-help program. Our show takes a deep dive into those psychological issues that affect us on a daily basis. We hope to shift your perspective and have you experiencing emotions differently. Now here are your hosts, Kim Foskey and Dr. Dana Saperstein.
The loss of a child is not an event. It is an indescribable journey of survival. On today's episode, we sit down with Berkley, Augie Johnson, who received the call that no parent ever wants to receive. His son was only 19 years old. This is a story not only of a family overcoming the death of a child, but surviving a natural disaster 3 years later that claimed the lives of 23 of their neighbors. This promises to be a very raw and candid conversation regarding perseverance, faith, and resilience. So, Augie, I was describing to Dana how you're probably one of the most kind, genuine, and gentle souls that I've ever met, that you're one of the good guys out there, truly one of the good guys. So I know you, the listening audience, some people may know you, but for those who don't know you, who is Augie Johnson?
Oh, well, thank you very much. I would say that you should talk to my wife. She'll set you straight on a number of the notes you just made about me. Right,
we'll allow her to come on a future episode and correct anything I just said.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm Augie Johnson. I was born in Berkley, California with my wife. We went to high school together, and I've known her since high school. I liked her in high school, but she was dating a teammate of mine. You know, the code, you couldn't break that up. And but she went to UCLA, and she came to UCLA, and we started dating. And we've been in Santa Barbara for 25 years and raised 4 children here. And she's a pediatrician, was a head of pediatrics over at Sansom, and she's continuing to be a pediatrician there. And I've worked many jobs here locally, salesman and for various financial institutions, and many of my jobs had to do with coaching our kids in Little League and softball and volleyball and basketball, and growing up through the local organizations here. Really enjoyed our time on the Central Coast here, and we'll be here. We're lifers.
You talked about coaching, and you and I met through CrossFit a number of years ago, and you are a competitive athlete still. Yes.
I continue. Both my wife and I rode for UCLA and played water polo for UCLA a bit, and we've continued to enjoy the discipline of the sports. And I row at the head of Charles every year at a team, and continue to throw down wherever I can. It's a joy in my life that I can still do that.
You've probably had to talk about this subject quite a bit, and maybe more than you want to, but you had a 19-year-old son that died suddenly and died tragically. And can you tell us a little bit about who Nick was?
Sure. Nick was a great kid. Your first kid, everything is such a big experience. So I got to experience all the joys of those first years, and I got to coach him throughout his before high school, and he picked up the love of water polo early on. But he was a great basketball player. He won the Grand Prix running cup for 6 years in a row for his age group, and he was just a good, solid kid. Loved sports, very open and honest kid. I got the joy of when he got older he came to our CrossFit gym, and so we got to throw down in the gym a lot. CrossFit is a very intense, high energy sport where you kind of whatever person's defenses are up at the beginning of the day, they're knocked out, and you get to see people as they really are. And he was a good kid. He went up through the Santa Barbara High School. He started at Montecito Union, and then he went to Santa Barbara Junior High, Santa Barbara High School. Met his love in Santa Barbara High, Charlotte Hendricks. The Hendricks family is a local water polo family, and they were together all through high school. And then he stayed in Santa Barbara as a on. He went to UCSB and was becoming a star water polo player there at UCSB. And one day during break, he was getting extra training in at Santa Barbara High School, and he was a very fast swimmer. He was too fast for the groups that were there, and so they gave him his own lane, and he was doing underwater repeats and where you hyperventilate and then you go into the water and go back and forth. And since he was on his own lane, they just didn't see him in time. He fell asleep at the bottom of the pool. And then we got that call that, every parent dreads, your son is going to the emergency room at the hospital, and you think, oh, he must have hit his head or slipped and fell or something like that. So you go to the hospital, you drive that lonely drive to the hospital, and I, to the moment I got there, I said, okay, well, we'll hold his hand when he's,
So you had
bandaged.
no indication, at least in the initial phone call, of how serious this event was at that point.
My wife had called me. They had called her, and he was on the deck and he's being transported to the hospital. And then that first moment when I got in, I saw the religious person standing there at the door, nice older lady with a cross on it. And that's when I thought, oh my God, my worst fears, that person's not usually standing there waiting for you. So it must be much more serious than I understood. And it just, and then they walk you in, and there is your son on the table being worked at by a team of, expert people trying to bring him back. And you stand there watching them work. And
so you're actually in the room while they're working on your son.
Yes, right there. There's nowhere else to go. It's the emergency room, and my wife is there, and we're holding each other, and we're looking at our son, and they're doing heroic measures, and they've been doing heroic measures for some time, all the way from the pool deck. And there's, you just can't understand the fears are realized there. There's no place to hide. There's not like, what if it is happening? And then you just try to live, you try to go from there.
Did it feel like that you had lost all sense of reality at that moment? I don't know if that makes sense.
Everything is so sharp. It's like I was there yesterday. There's some, not loss of reality, there's some surreal nature to it. There are people in a corner that don't understand that my son is dying. They're, reading a newspaper or having a cup of coffee laughing about the movie that they saw. That's happening 10 feet away from where they're trying to save my son. So you're just looking around, and some people are in the moment trying to do what it takes to bring him back. And there's others that have no clue. You're just in your little bubble.
That life is continuing on outside of this room.
Life is continuing on outside of this room, and it's just this one little bubble of intensity. And there's nothing we could do, and they tried, and I think they tried probably more because we were standing there. They probably went to the ends of the earth to try, and sometimes his heartbeat would come back, sometimes it wouldn't. And then eventually it just did not come back, and they couldn't save him. So,
did they ever explain to you what it is that happened to him? That
yes, the final issue is that something called shallow water blackout is the actual technical term of it. Wow. And it's a way and it happens to the best of athletes in the water. A lot of times two SEAL team members died right after Nick for the same reason. It happens where you can trick your body into not understanding that it needs to breathe. It thinks, when we go underwater, we feel this need to breathe. Your lungs feel like they're going to explode.
Right.
You can actually, with shallow water blackout, trick it so it doesn't feel like you need to breathe. You have no inclination to breathe, and then you're just out.
Wow.
And you're already way past the bounds because your body's already sucked up all the oxygen. So you have a very narrow window to survive once you go out.
And Nick had done that type of training before.
Everybody thinks about going underwater. Swimmers all the time hold their breath and go underwater. There's just a certain technique that you can do it where you can trick your body into not knowing it has to breathe. And it's a deadly obviously a deadly experience when it happens. His coach, Wolf Weigo, is a 3-time Olympian. He had shallow water blackout when he was younger, and his father, who was his coach at the time, jumped in and saved him. There was another local athlete that had the same thing happen to him in the DP pool, but they got to him quickly and he got out. And
so nobody noticed your son was in distress. Apparently.
He was just in his own lane, and they just didn't see him in time. And by the time they got to him, it was too late.
Wow.
So, obviously that was 7 years ago, and I could tell you every second of every moment of that day and the days afterwards.
What were the days afterward like for you?
It was one of my sons was playing water polo in Europe, in Hungary, and he had to, he had just started playing there, and he had to come back. It's the gathering of all the family and the, trying to figure out what to do next. It was the first child that had passed from our extended family, and we had friends and everyone that knew Nick, and how do you move forward? How do you take one foot and move it to the next? And my wife and I both work full time, and we had to eventually go back to our jobs, and our kids had to go back to school. And how do you make it in a way that your family doesn't fracture, that your kids don't go off the deep end, that
right.
There's a lot of, I blame myself for his intensity to the point that he needed to swim so hard. You go through a bunch of self-doubt. What if I had done it differently? What if I had
right.
raised him differently without that? So
you did feel a sense of guilt that maybe that you pushed him too hard in some way? Or?
Certainly. I worried that my own wife felt that I had, you go through 1,000 permutations of what if, I had done it differently, and to this day, you get slight reflections of, geez.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that a parent could ever get over the death of a child. I think you learn to cope.
Yeah. You try to find ways of turning that death into a positive.
Right.
You celebrate life rather than mourn his death is the only, and I really think, knowing Nick, that he would be angry if, I thought about that a lot. He'd be angry if I was too sad
right.
to not operate going forward, that I couldn't celebrate what a wonder, he had love, he found love. He was respected for his craft. He got to do a lot of really neat things in his 19 years. And I'm glad that he had those years.
Were you and your wife able to stay connected to each other? Because like you say, fracturing of a family happens oftentimes with a catastrophic loss.
Yes. I mean, there's certainly, you got to work through how it's like there's a fracture, if not an explosion of the family. And it's how do you put the pieces back together? Okay. The pieces never come back together perfectly. There's scars and rifts and gullies and hills, and
right.
But we've gotten through it. My wife and I continue to try to celebrate life, and she continues to work in her profession, and I continue to work in mine. And we have 3 other children. That's another thing. You can't dwell on the one. You want your children to thrive, and we're fortunate that we, the swim community in this town, the water polo community, is a close-knit community. We had a lot of love, and everyone helped us. And one of my sons became a physicist out of Berkley, and the second one is a mechanical engineer, works for Elon Musk on a Starship down in Texas. And my daughter's about ready to go to college. So, they got through it, but it was some heavy lifting there for several years.
I can imagine. I actually can't imagine having children. It's hard. It's just inconceivable.
Yeah. We miss them every day, and you try to do things that reduce the, there were moments where I would go back to work, and you have to go back to work. So 2 months in, I'm in a meeting, and I don't even know what they're saying. I don't know why I'm there.
Yeah.
And you look for, I got to say, alcohol made a positive difference in my life. it sounds terrible. You know, you don't want to become an alcoholic, but there are moments where the intensity is so intense that there's nowhere to escape, and you have a drink and it cuts the edge enough that, you know, you can get to the next moment of intensity.
Right. Have you been able to sort of only use it medicinally?
Yes.
And not sort of become a habit?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I almost joke about, you know, having a beer with a friend is very medicinal. You know?
Yes.
Having 12 shots of tequila, less so.
And did you notice that your relationships with friends and other people changed a bit as a result of what happened?
Yes. Yes, it did. Certainly we had good friends and they're staying close, and it was wonderful, but many of our friends love us, but it's hard to be around people that are in that grief. It really is. As much as you love them,
right?
Every time you see them, you're reminded of the horror of that time, the grief. So everyone came together a lot. We had lots of friends surrounding us for about 6 months, but then, you know, many of those people are gone. Not because we don't, you know, they dislike us or anything. It's just we're a heavy load to handle as a friend.
Well, what you represent is their worst nightmare. Yeah. And a lot of times people can't deal with those fears of having the same thing happen to them. And so they figure the easiest way is just to avoid whatever might remind them of their worst nightmare, which is really sad, because then you end up feeling like you've lost some good friends as a result.
Yeah. But those that are still there, it's a much richer experience. I mean, you have there's no defenses.
Did you sense a feeling of awkwardness around friends, or friends' awkwardness toward you, of not knowing what to say, not knowing what to do, or how to handle the situation?
Absolutely. And they fall into different categories. There's some that are so horrified they're trying to work through their own horror and fear, and so they bring it up to you, you know, and they say, I can't imagine what you're going through. It must be terrible. You'll never get over it. Well, thank you. I hope that's not the case. I hope that I can get over it, and that, you know, that Nick will be with me in a positive and loving way for the rest of my life. You know, but that's what they say to,
right,
because they have to get it out for themselves. And so they don't mean, it's not like they're trying to be selfish, but they're
it's all fear-based.
Find a way to survive their own fear. And there are others that we'll talk about it. Others don't want anything to do with that subject. We'll talk about anything but that time. You know, I absolutely I think of Nick as with me all the time. So
do you feel his presence?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I do. Not always, but there was one moment several years ago where it's always at night that's the hardest time. Yeah. And I'm in bed and I couldn't sleep, and I was just going, you know, through the whole day, which repeats in my head a lot. And just, you get that desperate kind of, without any other input in the middle of the night, you get a kind of a rebound where it just kind of grows and grows into almost a panic. And there was a moment there where I said, geez, you know, I'm going to explode. And then I got this vision in my head. It came unbidden. And it was of Nick coming to he was a fisherman. He loved fishing. The fishing, we have tattoos of fish on our arms, and he was just avid fisherman. Anything here in the channel, he was out hunting. And I had a vision of him going towards a mountain lake. It was this quiet lake in the morning. Sun's coming up over the mountains. And he had a rod in his hand, and he was intense, focused on going to that lake. And it was such a clear vision that I was immediately at peace. And maybe that's the body's attempt to survive, my mind's attempt to survive and find a way of rationalizing it. But it was so clear and so calm that I was like, he's okay, you know, and it almost made me feel like I can't wait to see him again.
Yeah. You know? Have you had any other sort of experiences where you feel like he's sort of tried to ease your pain a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, about 3 years ago, we were in the mudslides, the Montecito Mudslide.
Right.
And that night was a crazy night. It was, you know, we
what was it like for you?
Well, we barely survived. I mean, we got to the point where we were, you know, we were close to dying. The mud was chipping away our house, and we're on the top of our roof, and I'm saying goodbye to our children. I'm sorry that, it was right down to the wire, and but we all survived. And I could spend an hour talking about that night, but the ultimate thing was the odds of all those things lining up, that I woke up, just minutes before the mud hit our house.
And how did you wake up?
I shouldn't have woken up. I'd gone to bed late, and I was in a peaceful sleep in my bed, but something woke me up. Don't know what it was. Something made me get my clothes on and all my gear, which I never do in the middle of the night.
So you just had a really strong feeling.
Strong feeling. And
do you think it's possible that your son woke you up from a sleep?
I think it's possible.
Is that how you look at it?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. And got us, my other son was going to go from UCSB, where he was studying, to a friend's house that night and take care of it. And at the last second, he decided not to. He just felt, I'll do it in the morning. So he stayed. Home. That house was disappeared.
Wow.
My daughter and my wife were asleep down on the bottom floor. Both of them at the last second, unbeknownst to me, decided, let's just go upstairs.
Really?
And both of our house, our room was wiped out. I think if my wife had slept with me, maybe I wouldn't have woken up. My daughter, her room was gone. And so it's incredible, the odds of all of us surviving that night. Really, truly, if you add them all up, it's billions to one, considering where we were when.
Do your other family members sort of believe that there was some divine intervention?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
You guys haven't necessarily talked about the fact that maybe that your son kind of was trying to take care of everybody?
Possibly. We all felt just incredibly lucky. And, we lost everything. That morning we had no computer, no phone, no ID, no clothes.
You were up on the roof of your house?
Everything had been gone, just taken out. Everything chipped away from our house, and just where the fireplace was the strong area. And so the next day we were we were mud up to our eyes, and we just had to start again. Restart and find a way to, literally with nothing, come back again. And but I think of Nick as being a true positive. It was like a blip on the radar screen. My daughter was back in school 3 days later, with the borrowed clothes and a borrowed backpack. And I was back at work, and we were in a hotel room, just starting to live again, getting an ID and a passport and,
So while you were standing on the roof, what were you guys experiencing?
Well, it was the main flow was taking away our house, and there was a gas main that the head of it had been cut off, and so there was like a jet engine of gas permeating. It was just soaking into all the area. In the air, there's this roar of gas, but
it wasn't on fire.
It wasn't on fire. The one up above it exploded and caught fire. I think.
So let me just clarify for our listeners who don't know about the Montecito debris flow or live here in Santa Barbara, that on January 9th, 2018, at about 3 or 4 in the morning, Augie, Santa Barbara area had just experienced a major wildfire about a month earlier, and we had a torrential downpour rainstorm on that night in January that caused a lot of the mountain behind your home to come down, which included boulders and trees and mud and water and cars that literally flew through a majority of homes in your area, including your home. So for those who didn't understand what we were actually talking about here, now they can have a frame of reference of what happened. And again, like we said in the intro, unfortunately, it did claim the lives of 24 people.
Yes. Yeah. Good friends of mine that lived upstream of where I lived. Yeah. And that it was just chaos up there. It was a huge tanks and cars and parts of homes and bodies just flowing down past us. And It was, you don't know if you're going to make it, but then you do.
And you're standing there with your children and your wife.
Yeah. And we just I didn't know if I could throw a child to a lower impact area, off the roof. But it was just trying to go through every permutation. How do you survive? And you'd think that would be traumatic, but I'll tell you that the thing, what Nick did for us, again, a gift of his, was that it wasn't rebuilding from scratch wasn't a blip on the radar screen compared to losing Nick. Right. I mean, I think that alone would have been a very horrible experience to try to survive and get through and lose everything, lose your wedding albums, lose every picture you ever had. And we were before the cloud, everything we owned, every memory of Nick, everything, just going downstream, so you literally start with nothing and you start building your life again, your memories again, and your pictures. And
I think there's another very important part of that story for Augie, and if I remember the story correctly, at some point you were on the roof of your home with your family, and I believe that you heard a cry for help.
Well, it was actually, we were up there for probably 40 minutes until the mud started to die down. It was chest level, but you could wade through it. And some county firemen had prepositioned some assets about 100 yards out towards a escape route. And so we were able to get the whole family fight through the mud to these firemen, which were trying to, they were just coming on to chaos too. It was trying to find people and find them in their houses. And I was able to see everyone in our lane our little lane they were alive, except for one house just below us where a mom and her two kids lived. One of our cars was on what was left of a roof, and the whole inside had been caved in by the mud. So I was worried that they were buried. So when we got to the road, the county fire guys, I told them that there was one house. I could count for everybody except for this one house. And so they geared up and they went with me back to the area of the main hit. And in that, the jet engine of that gas was very loud, so you couldn't hear very much. But we were searching through this house trying to find this lady and her two kids. And in that rubble mound just before their house, there was a small bit of noise. And you could, down through all the, you could imagine there's this huge pile of twisted metal and concrete and rebar and rock, stone that had come from a half a mile upstream and smashed into our house, and then as a low pressure zone piled up behind the houses. That happened in various places around Montecito. That's where you found people and things. So once there was that little bit of noise, you could see a little bit of an elbow and a little bit of movement down in this hole filled with mud and rock. And the firemen there got all their gear and they called all their people in, and then, throwing everything we could, trying to get down to this little arm. It was pulled out of there, and I thought it might be one of the little boys, which meant the mom and the other boy was there. My wife, who's a pediatrician, was over near the firemen. The county fire guy and I went over to her, and she looked at it and said, this is a baby. It's not a young boy. It's just a little baby. It's not one of these. She didn't think it was one of the two. So it came from somewhere else. And as it turned out, that little baby had come from a half a mile upstream, had been carved out of his little bed, and had been somehow survived all that rock and rebar and stone for half a mile, just a baby, a 2-year-old child, and then deposited and then been piled up on top of it, and it survived. And again, I think the miracle of that, how you could hear that little teeny squeak, how you could find
you
it.
Actually heard that little
You
baby.
could hear a little bit, and then how it could be deposited, and it had been there for at least an hour or more at the bottom of that mud pit. Wow. Unfortunately, many of its family members didn't survive, but it's alive today, and I get to spend time with him. And
do you? Yeah. Have you developed a relationship with him?
With the father, yes, and I hope to be in his life forever.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is really remarkable.
So he's a great kid.
Yeah. Was he injured at all?
Be a HIPAA violation to talk about them, but they survived.
They survived. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you feel again that this was part of your destiny to get involved with a little guy and
certainly.
sort of have him be part of your life?
Absolutely. I support the family in any way that I can, and we'll continue to be his friend, and hopefully as he gets older and we can have more substantive discussions, talk about how we can make a positive impact on the future with him.
And how does he relate to you? Does he see you maybe like as an uncle or?
No, I'm distant. He's still a small child, and my interaction with him is not fully formed yet.
Oh, okay.
But I am there whenever.
Yeah. And you can feel it in your heart that he's somebody that, I guess in a way, now I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but do you think that your son was sort of all involved in that also to help you heal your heart in a certain way?
Well, again, I go back to, I'm not religious by nature, but certainly become spiritual in some form or fashion. And I can't imagine that we would have found that child without some type of guidance.
Right.
Somehow, because there's no way we should have found. There's no way he should be alive. No way we should have found him.
Right.
After all that, and
pretty miraculous.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's crazy in some ways how, But again, going back to fear, the gift that Nick gave me is I've realized my worst fears, and I'm still alive and still productive, and my family has realized its worst fears, and we're going to celebrate life. That's the gift that he gave me. Is I don't think I always celebrated life. I always worried about paying the mortgage and do I have enough money? Where are we going with our lives? What's our direction? I don't care about any of that stuff now. I'm going to enjoy the time on this earth and try to give enjoyment to others the same way.
So really, his death was a fundamental moment in your life in ways that you probably never expected.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
I'm interested in hearing how your other kids have dealt with these traumatic events in their life and what you and your wife have done to support them and how their perspective and trajectory may have changed from all of this.
Yeah. Well, talking about not putting words in their mouth, it would be good to have that conversation with them. I'd be curious. I haven't asked them that specific question.
We'll ask from your perspective.
Yeah. But from my perspective, each of them internalized it in different ways. My second oldest, which is now the oldest living son, he was in Europe when it happened. And so he wasn't there that moment. He had to come back, had to think about it, process it differently than everyone else that was at the my younger son I brought into the hospital so he could say goodbye to Nick and hold his hand. So he got that experience. My oldest son didn't get that experience. He had to come in and, and I didn't know what I was doing or how to operate effectively either, or how to talk to them or what to say to them. I was operating in the dark. I was in shock myself. So, he came in the door. I said, now you're the oldest. You have to, take on that mantle that Nick had. Probably the wrong thing to say to him. He was
certainly at that moment.
Not certainly at that moment, but I thought I was trying to help him say, we're going to get this together. That was, that didn't help him with his, oh my God, I've got a responsibility that I never had before. And I was just playing water polo in Europe. Now I'm going to have to do something.
He's trying to process on his own now.
Yeah. Right. So I didn't do him any favors when he walked in the door type of thing. I was trying to do some emotionally positive thing.
Nobody preps us for these things happening in our life. And, and we don't want to even think about it hypothetically ever happening. Right.
Yeah.
So your instincts kick in and you just say or do what you think is right at the moment.
Yeah.
Right. And then you second guess yourself down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So my daughter didn't want to, at the time she was very young and didn't want to see Nick. My older son was able to process it more, and it'll be interesting to see how, as time goes by, how each one of them develops their own fears, or, does the impact of those early moments somehow modify their behavior from where it was before.
Did you see any change? I mean, this is probably a rhetorical question, but did you see change in them almost immediately at all, in how they live their life, or how they dealt with you and your wife, or relationships of their own friends or school or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, they were good students. They continued to be good students. We try, I think, a long time ago, I was a salesman, and I was gone, every week. And I used to go out in the field and be back 3 days later. My wife had 4 kids and a full-time, doctor job. Wow. And I'd leave them, and she'd have to take care of the entire family, all the travel and school and everything, and do her job. And I was gone frolicking in the sales fields of the world. And I was out all over the country selling, and then coming back, and I would be gone for 3 or 4 days, and then come back, I'd feel guilty. So I would get all of my kids' presents, and I would walk in the door, and here's my wife, fighting to get them in the bed, and I'm the hero bringing presents home and causing really more disruption than what I should have. And then they begin to expect the presents. Even when I was gone for a day, where's my present type of thing. I realized I was doing more home good. So what I learned was that however long I was gone, if I just came right in the door as if I had never left and said, is your homework done? And didn't make a big thing about it, they wouldn't make a big thing about it. It became, Dad's here, Dad's not, doesn't matter. And I think I tried to do that with the death of Nick the same way. Nick died. Okay. We've grieved. Okay. Was your homework done? Where are you going to go this weekend? Are you going to a movie with your friends? Or who's going to be there? Just try to be a dad as if you'd be a normal dad, as if nothing had happened. And I think from my perspective that it helped smooth out some of the highs and lows that happen after death. It's like that you get these big mountains of grief that just wash over you. You can't do anything. And then you get, a moment of peace, and then you dreading the next mountain of grief that's going to wash over you, and you become dysfunctional in your work or your marriage or all those things. But if I could keep it steady, maybe it would give enough time for those ripples to die down, and we could just get back to living.
Was that your experience?
I think that was for the most part of our experience. I mean, the proof to me was the kids' grades. I mean, if they had crashed and all gotten into drugs and trouble and, problems, I think we probably didn't get through it without bad scars, but they to this day, they're functioning and moving forward. And I'm hopeful we did the right thing. Time will tell.
And they don't speak much about his death at this point in your life.
No, I mean, again, one of the things that I tried to do, and again, each kid and my wife is different than I too, but try to embrace it every day, to bring Nick's name up in conversation as if he was there. Hey, remember when Nick, won the Grand Prix, and we went to that thing and we met those people? Those people just, their daughter just had a baby, or, some of that, and try to keep him close. Right after the funeral, all the older kids had disappeared, and we didn't know where they had gone after the funeral. And then they came back, and what they'd done is one of our relatives had designed a tattoo with the waves of Santa Barbara and Nick's initials in the middle with a fish hook, because again, he was a fisherman. And they had all gone out after the funeral and gotten this tattoo. Wow. And it became kind of a thematic element, and all the relatives that we know went out and got this tattoo. And about a year later, I hired a local photographer here, Dave Kafer, who's a great guy. And I had him go around the country to wherever they were and take photos of them doing their most passionate thing. One's a runner up, as a runner, he has a picture of her running along Mount Hood with their tattoo on her ankle. And another one.
How sweet.
Yeah. Charlotte Hendricks, has a tattoo and swimming. She was a water polo player. So I have this book of all all the people that love Nick and all the relatives with their tattoo.
That is really lovely.
So, you can do silly little positive things that turn out to be something that you can look at the person in joy rather than sorrow. That's what I'll continue to try to do. That's the way I can try to remain healthy myself, is to find ways of having joy.
You bring up a really good point, and sometimes a person gets lost in the bitterness of what happened. And it sounds like you've tried really hard to deal with the sorrow, but not to feel sorry for yourself, which is a really big difference. So you guys acknowledged how sad it was, but didn't sort of see yourself as being victims of the situation.
Yeah.
And that's how, in some ways, how you avoid the bitterness that can take over your life.
Yeah.
That's just a remarkable way to do it, is to find fun, ways to celebrate what a lovely person that he was.
Yeah, I think you're right, that there's that little bit of poison from the bitterness of, you see it. I see it a lot, and people die, and the first thing you hear is someone's representing them for the lawsuit,
right? Because
they're so angry that it happened,
right?
And, within a day of that happening, I wanted to see where he passed away. I wanted to go to the site,
sure,
and understand that his last moment of life was in this pool, Santa Barbara High Pool, and they pulled him to the side and wanted to see where he was lying there, where they were trying to save his life. Maybe his spirit left him, and the county was so afraid of the legal ramifications.
Right.
They had to have senior administration people from the city and from the school
to be there with you,
me, because what a crazy thing to think. But I understand it now. Because the first inclination of people when they're angry is to lash out at
right.
Indiscriminately.
There has to be somebody else to blame for
someone
this.
has to be someone to blame, and I could imagine. I did not want to sue. I would never have imagined suing the high school, or that just compounds the. What are you going to do? He's gone. It doesn't matter.
Right.
But I get the inclination for why people do it. I don't think it helps, though, in the future. I really don't. I think, like you said, trying to find a way to be positive. I think about my own daughter, probably one of the strongest. If you imagine, she's a water polo player. She's going to go play water polo Division I next year. For her whole career at Santa Barbara High, she has had to swim over the spot where her older brother died every day of her life.
At the very pool.
At the very pool. Every time we go see a game at the pool every day, we have to see where our son died. It's like going to a gravestone every day of our lives. And
right.
She's had to be there in that water, in the water that he was in.
Has she said anything about that? Is it troublesome to her in any way? Or does she look at it like, her brother's just hanging out with her?
Well, one of the things, Coach Walsh at the time did a great thing. He had kind of I think it was a Hawaiian celebration, but he did some type of celebration of the water, celebration of life in the water and in the pool. And he kind of blessed it with joy after the thing. And I think that was helpful
to her.
I think helpful to her, helpful to me.
Yeah.
But it takes pure strength, to go to that pool every day and say, cheer and clap. And of course, it's kind of like that hospital scene. Nobody knows that part of it. I don't say anything at the pool. I don't bend down. When I'm in private moments, I bend down to the cement where he died and I kiss it,
Right.
But I don't do that when anyone else is around,
right.
That kind of thing.
Right.
So when you walk into the pool deck now, what's your first thought? Is it a positive thought about that experience in that pool and that campus, or? It's
certainly where I want to be. It's not always, my wife, again, it's hard for her to go there and cheer, and, you have to do it, but it's hard. It's not perfect. No, I don't get great joy jumping on the pool. I love it when she wins her game. We celebrate the wins. We mourn the losses, but we don't really talk about it. It's too much to go into that every time you get on the pool deck.
And there was no consideration from your daughter about playing at a different school. because of what happened to her brother?
I think early on she was fearful about that first day of getting in the water, and we haven't talked about it that much, but she did it, and she's in it, and she has to, it's her school, and she's not going to change schools because of that, which shows to her strength and character. And she wanted that tattoo that everyone else got of Nick, and she's underage. So, but she's strong. And so we took her to a country that would allow her to have that tattoo. So she got the tattoo when she was 16. And she continues to amaze me with her own resiliency and strength.
I know that you didn't want to speak for your kids, and you gave us a nice perception of how you feel that your kids have dealt with these issues. You've mentioned your wife, who's a physician in this town, but we haven't really talked about how she dealt with it in the process. And again, she's not here, and I know that you probably would rather her speak about that. But
certainly,
what's your perception of how your wife has processed and dealt with a lot of these traumatic issues in terms of how you've done it and how she's done it?
Well, she's probably a little more quiet about it than I am. I can only really speak to my own, and I'm very reticent to talk to her about her, because she may totally object to my perception of how she deals and handles it. But for me, talking about Nick has always been therapeutic and a positive thing. I had an old boss back in the day, and he was talking about financials, but he said, Augie, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I've always kept that with me. The fact that you bring sunlight to a subject or to a fear or to whatever's troubling you, if you can bring it out into the light, it usually lessens the impact of whatever that issue is. And I believe that. So for me, my help has been to talk about it and to embrace it, for better or worse, because there's certainly worse too. For my wife, I think, she comes from the medical profession. She sees sick children every day for almost 30 years. She's maybe more pragmatic about death, maybe possibly just from her professional perspective, and keeping a sanity about being with sick people all the time and how you have to be professional about it. So she has more of a medical perspective maybe, but she's grieved long and hard as I have. And I don't think she wears her grief on her sleeve probably like I do.
Had you experienced any form of family death prior to your son dying that was either sudden or tragic that may have given you a little bit more perspective going into this?
Yeah. Well, as we talk about the resonance of the spiritual side, my own older sister, we had 3 boys and a younger daughter in our family. In my family growing up, there were 3 girls, and I was the youngest. My oldest sister committed suicide when I was in high school, about the same time as my son Sam was in high school. So there's some uncanny, eerie timing relationships of the whole thing. But I got to see, when my sister committed suicide, my parents checked out. I mean, they just checked out. And, I had my graduation from high school was 3 months later. I went to that graduation on my own. No one went to my graduation. I went to my college graduation on my own. They just checked out after that. So I had some experience about just, being, the parents have to go through their own grieving process. And I was trying not to replicate what my parents did when my own sister passed away. With my own son, Sam, who's now my oldest living son, he had to do the same thing. It was a really tough time. He was just in his senior year. He's got 3 months. He's got to go through the celebration of graduation. He's got to, smile for the cameras and hold up his plaque and go to his senior prom. And we have to celebrate that senior prom and be happy and wave and do all the things that you would do to make a normalized life. And that was really hard on him and us. And, but he deserves that right to be happy. And I think that is one of the hardest challenges I've had is to, we're spending all this time talking about Nick and grief, but he's gone. And our children, those are the ones that we have to support and celebrate moving forward. Nick is a part of our life. He's in the fabric of our souls, but he would want us to move forward. And that is the challenge, as to how do you support and strengthen your kids and not let them go off the deep end while you're grieving on your own.
Yeah.
Did you feel that you had to pick up the ball that your parents dropped with your other siblings? And did you have older siblings?
Yeah, I was the youngest. Okay. I just remember being incredibly angry at everything, just for years. Super angry at why she got to the point that she did. How did that happen? And my effort to understand that, I worked for United Way as a crisis suicide rape prevention hotline type of person. I worked there at nights. I did my day job, and then at night I would work at night at this call center for crisis. And
your sister's suicide got you to do that type of work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to I just wanted to, one, try to help other people that were having trouble, but then two, help myself too, just try to live through embrace it. And one of the things I kind of learned through that process, those years on that suicide crisis hotline, was that for many people, everyone has a fear or a crisis. And although we had this catastrophic crisis of our child, a crisis could be losing a dog or, getting fired. It doesn't, that can just be as searing to that person as what it was to us. Everyone has, fear and crisis. And what my own experience of that process was that it wasn't the first thing that caused suicidal ideation or real crisis. It was is sometimes the second blow. Losing Nick was, in a bubble, and we were able to survive it. If we had lost Nick and then lost another family member, or, had lost our jobs, or, if someone gets divorced and then loses their job, it's the 1-2 punch that was always a higher level of suicidal ideation or potential suicide risk than just being the one loss. Everyone can absorb one hit. It's the second and tertiary hits that we have to be prepared for, as they come down the road. We were lucky that enough time, I think, had passed between Nick passing and losing our home and our memories and everything, that we were able to treat them as separate events. And Nick actually strengthened us for that rather than weakening us to that process.
That's actually an interesting perspective, in that sometimes grief doesn't follow linear time. It's just a part of time. And so sometimes, losing a house in a situation after that could have multiplied, but it doesn't sound like it did that for you at all.
No, and I think it was the timing of the events probably. We were far stronger when we lost our house and home, and we shrugged it off pretty rapidly. I mean, there was obviously some sadness that we, for our kids, that the place that they grew up was no longer, and certainly some tears over losing our everything that we had. But
are you back in that house now?
We were going to try to be. I was following that pattern of strength. I was like, yes, we're going to rebuild and get back to it. But then the first rainfall came, and we were like looking for our baggage. How do we jump in the car and escape? And I didn't want, the idea of potentially putting my children back in the path of something like that. I couldn't imagine going through that again,
right? Or
risking, fate about tempting. You hear about people rebuilding on the Florida coast after a hurricane. I was like, no, I don't. I think I'm going to.
Doesn't sound like a good idea.
Move to a less apocalyptic elevation. So we moved about 6 blocks away, but at a much higher elevation.
Okay. Well, that was probably actually a really smart thing to do, because I think that sometimes people try to just be brave and assume that no, it's never going to happen again. And instead, you made a decision that helped everybody feel safer, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Does it feel like home? Have you been able to kind of make it your home?
It took years to finally get the building permits and so we just have moved in, and it's different than what we had, but we're slowly integrating into it.
Oh, okay.
And, but I believe it's great. And the first rain came, we didn't have to evacuate.
Right.
So,
amazingly enough, there are still people coming to see me who have sort of delayed post-traumatic stress from that event. Some of those people are teenagers. They were young teenagers at the time and have now at the end of their teen years and are starting to have trouble sleeping. And whenever it rains, they start to panic. And the most common way that teenagers try to handle trauma is by just sort of pushing it away and trying not to think about it. When they push their feelings down, their feelings come out sideways in the form of symptoms like insomnia or anxiety. So I've sadly had to tell a few young people, you can't just pretend like what you saw and what you experienced didn't happen. That's not the way to handle this situation at all. So it's good that you guys, initially were able to be with each other and take care of each other.
Yeah, I think it helped.
Makes a big difference.
Certainly I'm sensitized to where we are. I look for outlets and sight lines, and wherever I am, I check the environment and the weather report a little, and
absolutely
make sure I know it's coming down the pipe.
When I was going to school, I worked in a psychiatric ward for a really long time, and now whenever I walk into a room, I never sit with my back to the door. For the same reason that you're talking about, because I realized that was the most dangerous position in the room. So I think we all make little compensations for, to try to keep ourselves as safe as we can when we experience things that are really frightening and overwhelming.
Yeah. We've embraced the cloud, putting all of our pictures on the cloud. That's another thing. Keep your memories where.
So we're coming to the end of our conversation here. And again, really appreciate you being here, Augie. And one of the things that I wanted to do to kind of end this conversation, I think to end it appropriately is to kind of pay a tribute to your son, Nick. He wrote a personal anthem that I think that you found on his computer after his passing.
Yes, he wrote it the day before he passed.
The day before he passed. And if you would like me to read it, I'll read it. If you would like to read it. Okay. I
would try, but I wouldn't make it.
And I'm going to try and do it without breaking up either here.
Just to give you context, he was he loved his team, his water polo. He really was passionate about it, and he was never the biggest or the strongest. But I always told him you didn't have to be the biggest or the strongest. You just had to work the hardest. And he was always the first to get in the pool and the last to leave. And he believed strongly if you did that it would help the team. And that's what he believed in. He was absolutely committed to the team, and he was going to make that team win by his effort. And I think he wrote that to himself as something to remind him of where he came from and what he was about.
I'm going to take a deep breath and try and get through this here. Where do you go when the buzzer sounds and the stand's clear? Do you look toward your team and say to yourself that you did everything you could do? Or do you hold your head up and never make the same mistakes again? When the other team is taller, stronger, do you become physically weaker or mentally tougher? When all is said and done, do you accept defeat or rise and rise again? You're a human being. The laws of physical ability do not govern you. You are the one thing on earth holding yourself back and moving yourself forward. What other people say and do means nothing because you're the master of your fate and nobody can tell you otherwise. People with less motivation, less drive, less ambition will try to tell you the world has its limits. They'll give you some damn good excuses as to why there's no point in trying. But they don't define your reality. You do. Only you decide when you've had enough. No one else can decide when it's your time to call it quits. Only you can face your team at the end of the day and live with who you are. So go on and be great. Be everything you thought you could be. Shock the world. And be the underdog. Come from behind winner. In a world where things don't always add up, how you choose to act is all that matters. Be all you can be. Good luck. Augie, thanks for being here.
Sure.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
We appreciate our listeners and are interested in your comments and suggestions. Feel free to email us at fearmeoutpodcast@gmail.com. If you are interested in becoming a sponsor for this podcast, please email us at fearmeoutpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.